here are print line examples. Scott, I'll probably hand it back to you at some point to talk about, the origin of print lines and how these occur. If you need to color comment that, but it's from a layman's perspective, issues in the printing methodology where roller bearings have worn out on the conveyor systems that when these large sheets of cards are printed, if they're not maintaining those properly, there can be artifacts generated in the form of these types of defects on cards. Anything you would like to say there, Scott, in terms of what we're looking at here? These are representations of how print lines look in the generated imagery that we were just talking about earlier.
Yeah, no, nothing to add there, Greg. I think you hit it perfectly. Just it's all in the manufacturing process, how the cards are coming off the print line and onto the sheets. Yeah, I don't think there's anything more to add. They're much more common on the Chrome stock cards. You see them a lot on Panini Prism cards, on Topps Chrome cards, Panini Mosaic, those types of cards. This is a Mosaic card, or where more often than not you'll find these little print lines that are kind of unattractive to the appeal of the card.
Yeah, and as you can. Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
I'll just make the comment that the hobby is much more familiar with the term print lines than they are the terms fray and fill.
Right, I bet. Yeah, mostly because I'm sure because these are visible, right? And from a deduction perspective, very meaningful, right, to the end card grade. Here are further examples of print lines. Even like I decided to include these because these are nearing what we refer to as NHOD. So in many cases, we can observe print lines and other artifacts that are, as we've already stated, that aren't even visible to the human eye, that don't represent any form of significant deduction as far as a traditional grade level, but are applicable to numerical deductions on the 1,000 scale. Here is exactly what we're talking about in the bottom right corner of a card, where there's been some handling. You can see all these striations are all minute scratches in this bottom right corner of the card that have been grouped, right? So it's really interesting. Only a handful of these may be visible to the human eye. We've detected a lot of them, right? Some of them, as visible, right, clearly visible on the card surface, are certainly going to represent larger deductions than some of the lesser scratches. But I think it's interesting for the viewers to understand, with this type of imaging, how the surface of that card really looks, right? And how amazing the technology is to be able to bring that out.
If I may, Greg, I'm kind of continuing to think about one of the questions kind of implies that there's almost because of the level of detail that we see, that there's almost an inherent, I'm going to get a lower grade because they see more of the card type of feel. So I just wanted to say that when we identify a small defect, NHODs are even less than this, but when we identify a small observable defect, and that defect has a certain number of points attributed to it, keep in mind that that defect rolls up with other defects into a corner score, let's say top left. That happens with the top left rolling up into a top left, top right, bottom left. So you have a continuing minimization of that defect. That goes up into a front and back. That goes up into a card. So when we're talking about a defect, a single defect, when somebody says, oh, that's 40 points for that defect, that has no relationship to what the actual amount of points are that are attributed to the card grade. So we're seeing things on a really, really microscopic level. And I just wanted to make sure people understand. The system sees it, the system records it, the system scores it, but we have accounted for all that in the grading so that the grading represents the today's existing industry standard grading and expectations.
Yeah, well put, Steve. And I want to give a shout out to Scott here because, you know, what he's been able to help generate here is a system where any experienced grader would be able to look at a grade given by the tag system and provide agreement, right, on that card score, from a traditional card grade perspective, right? The new grade range that we're introducing here from the 1,000-point scale, right? There's a mapping, and we talked about that mapping. I actually threw it as the last slide here just to take a quick glimpse at that Scott recited. But yeah, it's through Scott's work and reviewing hundreds and thousands of cards that have been generated by the output of everything that we've worked together to generate that has confirmed, right, the appropriateness of the deductions that we're seeing here. So
yeah, let me just say with respect to that, we started a long time ago. We've been through 4 development processes: the proof of concept, the prototype, the minimum viable product, the production model. And at each one of those steps, for each one of those deliverables, Scott graded thousands and tens of thousands of cards. So when Greg is saying that Scott has graded thousands of cards, that's on top of the thousands and thousands of cards that have gone on into developing all of these tools over the 8 to 10 years. So it's an enormous number of cards that he's looked at.
Okay.
Yeah, so why don't we just finish this out when we get to Q&A, Jeremy? So here's a good example of how a roller mark appears to our system, right? So this long vertical edge, a roller mark, if you're not familiar, is again a byproduct of the printing process, where most likely it's a roller bearing by which these sheets of printed card material have been transported. And if a bearing rolls, if a bearing seizes, right, then you can imagine what's occurring, right? That roller, right, is essentially making an indentation on the entire length of that card and every other card that was printed in that sheet. And then this card just so happens to also have a long scratch here on